Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by
the Bartlett Area Chamber of Commerce and its member company, Ewing Kessler Incorporated, providing mechanical and building control solutions for sustainable, energy-efficient building performance. This privately owned regional company is committed to relationships and service responsive to clients' needs. Learn more at ewingkessler.com and ekautomation.com.
the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Superintendent Dorsey Hobson, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by Dorsey Hobson, Superintendent, Shelby County School System.
How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being back.
My pleasure.
Along with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So the Shelby County schools are in their third year. We were just talking about that. This is your third year as superintendent and interim with Memphis City Schools before that, so 4 years. Your biggest hurdle every day to get done what you want to get done for the school system?
We always have significant budgetary challenges. It's like every year. And if I could, put some context to it, we've cut about $200 million over the last 4 years. We have reduced our central office staff. We've closed 17 schools. And despite all those tough decisions, we've shown positive academic growth and our test scores have continued to improve. But we're at a point now where, as we go through this, I guess will be our fourth budgetary cycle with a significant budget gap, there's really nowhere else to cut other than the classrooms. So, as you continue to try to juggle the cuts that need to be made versus the support we want to have for some very fragile kids, it's tough. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I'm just so proud of our school leaders and teachers because despite some extraordinary challenges, they continue to show positive achievement. I'm very proud of our school leaders and teachers.
Let's break down those numbers a little bit. The $200 million in cuts, how many fewer students are there over that same period of time, give or take, right? Because there's so much shifting, so just try to get my baseline.
So I think you have to throw out the merged year.
Okay.
Because obviously we were about 145,000 students then. We're at now, in terms of traditional schools, about 94,000 students. Okay. When you go back to the legacy Memphis City Schools days, I think we were right at about 101,000 schools. But then you have to also consider the fact that the Shelby County schools now, in addition to the old Memphis City Schools, there are 18 schools that were in unincorporated parts of Shelby County. Yeah. So, certainly student enrollment declines are always a challenge.
When you talk about the budget number, where do all that budget is separate from the ASD, which we'll talk about a little bit. Yeah. Is it separate from any charter schools, or does that number include the charter schools under your umbrella, even if they're independent of Shelby County schools?
It does, but all we really do, Eric, we do just straight pass-through of the charter school money. And I think just for context, again, this year we're losing about, or next year we're losing about $50 million in revenue. So we've made about $50 million worth of cuts, but the issue becomes we have about $26 million worth of new charter schools coming online. Okay. So we pass that money through. So you have to cut, the decline in revenues, but then you also have to make provisions to cut for new charter school growth.
How many charter schools, separate from the ASD, how many charter schools are there now?
We'll have 50 next year. We'll have our budget will be around $897 million next year. About $115 million are straight pass through to charter schools.
We'll get Bill here in a second. Just a couple more details here. The budget gap for this upcoming year, what is the number?
The number is $72 million is what we started with, but then again, you have to put that $26 million, you have to account for that for the new charter school. So you probably have to cut somewhere around $100 million if you're going to cut.
Good Lord.
But the hope is that the community and the county commission will see that we're being as efficient as we possibly can, and we're getting positive results. I'm sure we'll talk about it. I mean, our iZone is one of the most successful turnaround models in the country. So hopefully that people will realize that we're being good stewards and doing a good job, and maybe we can start to get a little financial support.
All right, Bill.
So as you start to talk to the Shelby County Commission about that, what do you think the barometer is for them after several years of cutting your funding? Do you think that they're in a mood to say, okay, we've got it about as far as it can go, now let's look at what we can add to it, especially since they've got about $500 million in a surplus?
So I think that the overall tenor of the Shelby County Commission is that they've been very supportive of the work that we've been doing. You know, they have an obligation to be fiscally conservative, and we appreciate and respect that. And they ask some very good questions. You know, I think that overwhelmingly they want to make sure we're being efficient. But I think we've shown that we have been efficient, and you know, the comments and conversations that I've had with different county commissioners suggest to me that if we can make a strong and documented case based on data, there may be some willingness to support the school district further.
Since you were last on, we've had a Tennessee Attorney General's opinion on OPEB, other post-employment benefits, and the opinion dealt specifically with the OPEB obligation or liability from Memphis City schools. Is your are your dollar figures going into this new fiscal year, does that include the OPEB liability?
Yeah, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we have to make sure we take care of our retirees. I want to applaud Terry Rowland, you know, for showing some leadership around this issue and appointing a ad hoc committee. Mayor Rowland, Mayor
Not yet. He's not. Let's not.
Mayor Luttrell.
Point him yet.
He has shown a lot of leadership too. We've had a lot of meetings with him. David Reeves, we had a lot of meetings with him. So we're all working behind the scenes to figure out, you know, what the right approach is given the Attorney General's opinion. Notwithstanding that, though, you know, we budget about $32 million every year to quote unquote pay as you go to address our employee health care and OPEB liability. But the reality is, I think you hit the nail on the head. In addition to having a budgetary shortfall every year because we have a structural deficit, you know, we have a $1.5 billion debt that we have to figure out, you know, how we're going to fund. We're trying to be as aggressive as possible. I mean, ideally, we'd be putting aside, you know, $25, $30 million extra a year to make sure we fund the ARC, which is the annual required contribution. But when you're, you know, struggling to just, you know, balance your budget, we don't have the luxury of putting money aside to address the OPEB.
The 1.5 billion, just so people are clear, that is the OPEB, that is the healthcare benefits.
Yeah.
The retirement system is in good shape? Or
yes, so that's through the state.
That's through the state. So that has always been, there's not a ticking time bomb there
exactly.
from your point of view.
Exactly.
OPEB for Shelby County Schools, I think we talked about this last time you were on, and some people know this, some people probably don't. That includes retired teachers from Germantown, from the old Shelby County school system, and Memphis. So although the school system split and there are the suburban schools, you all have the responsibility for that whole legacy retirement system.
That's correct. I think at the time of the merger, the legacy Shelby school systems had about $400 million in OPEB liability. The legacy Memphis City schools had about $1.1 billion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Bill.
So will you've talked with the school board before about possibly changing the benefits. Will there be a proposal that you'll have coming up on that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we made some very aggressive recommendations to deal with a very aggressive problem. I think our school board, you know, very smartly asked us to slow it down a little bit, and we brought in some consultants from Detroit who actually helped Detroit, who obviously were in a much worse situation than the Shelby County schools, get their OPEB liability under control. So we're actually working with those consultants now. We'll be rolling out and sharing some recommendations in the upcoming weeks. And I think the board just wanted to make sure we double-checked and triple-checked the numbers and double-checked and triple-checked the recommendations, but then wanted to make sure we had some assistance as we implement what will be very difficult or challenging changes. I mean,
and changes are cuts in benefits, right? I mean, lots of companies, lots of organizations are going through this because the cost of healthcare is getting so high. But really, it's probably things like higher co-pays, higher deductibles, those sorts of. I know you're not going to necessarily get into the details of it, but those kinds of changes.
That, for example, if you work for the school system, you started working when you're 25, you work 30 years, you retire at 55, you get, full health care, and the payments, are, not as high as they've been in other places. So, one of the recommendations that we made was to not offer employee health insurance to pre-65 retirees. Just things like that. The reality is that, with the Affordable Health Care Act and other different kinds of options that exist now that may not have existed 10 or 15 years ago, there's much more flexibility and much more opportunity to be efficient. Having said that, when people work for you 4 years with a promise, they expect for that promise to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
So I think the board is just doing the delicate balancing act to make sure, A, that the cuts are the right cuts, but then also that when we make the changes and cuts, that retirees are supported in moving up maybe to a different system.
You talked about efficiency, and you talked about some of the cuts to the administration and school closings. That was one of the constant criticisms, I think, of the old Memphis City schools, was that they were half-filled schools just because of population changes within the city, that schools that need to be closed. And there's always the administration is bloated. You got 100 people with 6 figures out. There's just always these kind of stories and rumor and talk more about school. Let's start with school closings. You've closed 17.
Yeah.
Will more be closed?
Yeah. Can I do the opposite? Do the opposite thing? Because
Well,
I think at the end of the day, our central office makes up 2% of our entire budget now. It's probably around 4.2, 4.3 to Memphis City Schools. And so just for context, we have a $72 million budget gap. If you eliminated all the employees at the central office, it'd be $18 million.
Okay.
So I think that we worked incredibly hard to streamline central office. Almost to a fault. I think that there are some things that I wish we had back. I think when you don't have critical people, it affects our ability to have better customer service and things of that nature, but we're working through it.
How many people in the administrative office, the administration?
I think the total central office is somewhere around 700, I believe. But that includes, all non-school-based personnel. You think about it. We have a nutrition center. We feed 1,000. We serve 100,000 meals every day. We have a $20 million transportation contract. We have an athletic department. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
But I think that we have demonstrated, and partly through the good work of the TPC years ago, made some very aggressive recommendations that we followed. So I think that we are certainly efficient in our central office. With regard to schools closures, we're going to have to make some more tough decisions. I say that because we're doing an analysis now, and we're having an outside group, paid for through the Gates Foundation, to come in and just test, our footprint. And the reality is we have about 27,000 more seats than students. And when you have this structural deficit, when you're constantly looking to your fund balance, we're going to have to make some dramatic changes to our footprint, really for our long-term health. And then obviously, as your footprint shrinks, you can change some of the structures of your central office too. So those are things that are going to happen. We expect that probably somewhere around the fall, we'll be rolling out a very, very comprehensive footprint analysis. We'll be getting feedback from the community. But the reality is that, we cannot continue to operate poor performing under-enrolled schools.
Right, which inevitably will, people will say, that's great, but not my kid's school, right? You just get into those incredibly difficult decisions.
Yeah.
But you're saying that's just going to happen.
Yeah, and I think it's really incumbent upon me to, in a very transparent way, in different venues, share the data, and then share the vision for how things can make better. Because what happens is, if you think back to a couple of years ago, we closed a couple schools in Whitehaven, West Haven. And, so people were up in arms about it, but we came up with a solution that really people were excited about. So we closed 3 schools, but built 1 new school.
Yeah.
So I think you just have to have solutions like that where people don't feel like, I'm getting the shaft.
Yeah.
And then I think also included in that is, when you combine schools, we have to have a very, very aggressive strategy for improving the academic achievement. Because
Yeah.
I always say, to me, this is about like the dollars. What we found is you don't really save that much money closing schools, but what you do is you get a larger concentration of students in a school, and then you can invest resources in that school. You know, a big problem we have, we talk about the iZone, is that, you know, we still have, a big teacher shortage. You know, we have a lot of principals that are brand new, so when you consolidate, then, you know, you can get, you know, your best teachers and your best school
Yeah.
leaders in front of the most kids.
Yeah, okay. Bill,
Let's
about
talk.
10 minutes left.
Let's talk about the competition for the teachers in particular, because we hear a lot about, oh, you're competing with the ASD and with charter schools and with private schools. What do you tell teachers who teach in the innovation zone schools? Because I would imagine that those other players have to compete against you when it comes to attracting teachers because of the work that the iZone schools have been able to do.
Yeah, I think that what I've found, Bill, is that the teachers who teach in the iZone don't do it for the money. It's really more of a calling, you know, as it were. I mean, you know, we look at the iZone like, you know, the trauma center. You know, every doctor is not going to work in the ER, you know, because you have kids who are so far behind. They need intense treatment. You see things every day that you shouldn't see. And, you know, while there's some financial incentive to be in the iZone in the form of sign-in bonuses and retention bonuses, you know, teachers tell me without exception, we don't do it because of the money. We do it because we have a passion for it. But I do think that because of the national recognition that iZone has received, we've had people from DC here. I think people from Indianapolis are coming next week. Nashville's coming, Knoxville's coming to see the good work's going on. I think that does create a lure for people who are interested in turnaround work and then maybe interested in moving beyond the classroom and turnaround work.
So are your teachers there new teachers? Are they veteran teachers? Or are they Teach for America? What's the mix there?
We have a good combination of all of those teachers. I think that we looked at some data the other day. We had a TFA contract for our school board. We probably have 47 TFA teachers in our iZone, but I think that more than half are veteran teachers who have a lot of experience in turnaround schools or priority schools.
A couple just basics on iZone. Innovation Zone Schools
Yeah.
was started the first year that Shelby County Schools, I mean, it's been around 3 years or?
The year before. It's
Year
the
before.
fourth- Yeah.
How many schools are there?
We have 21 schools in the iZone. I think we're bringing on 3 more next year.
And someone out there listening is saying, that's fantastic. How come all the schools aren't iZone schools?
Well, I mean, the reality is there is a cost
Yeah.
to it. You know, the school day is longer, so teachers make more money. We do sign-in and retention bonuses, and then we spend a lot of money on targeted and specific support around reading and around math. You know, quite frankly, I wish that every priority school we had, or every bottom 10% school we had, could be an iZone, but you have a cost, which goes back to, you know, if you can consolidate some schools and then invest those iZone resources in schools, and you can begin to touch more kids.
In iZone school, the costs are 10% more than a peer school, 20, I mean, what's
It's about $600,000 more because of the longer school day, because of the intervention and support, and because of the bonuses.
You said you'd love for all the priority schools to be iZone schools. What about the ones that are ASD schools? I mean, where are you? There's some political debate. There are families, there are kids, you know, parents and so on who aren't happy with the ASD, which is the state-run effort on priority schools.
Yeah.
We had Malika Anderson on a couple weeks ago. We've had you on with Chris Barbick, the former head of the ASD, at least once or twice. Do you see that you know, the Vanderbilt study came out that people can look up that pointed to better performance in the iZone versus ASD? Is it time for all these ASD schools to become iZone schools and the ASD to go away?
Well, I think, again, it's a matter of, you know, resources. You know, obviously, as Chris and I used to say all the time, we had a healthy cooperation. And, you know, the reality is that, you know, we have so many schools that need additional support that the Shelby County schools, just quite frankly, the way things are constructed now, doesn't have the resources to address all of our priority schools. You know, in theory, you know, the ASD would be a great partner because they bring additional resources, not just money resources, but also human capital resources. But I think that we'd all agree that, you know, we'd like to have better results from the ASD. and some of the charter operators. And it's not just the district as the ASD as a whole. There are some of the operators and some of the direct run schools that are getting great results for kids. So I think that the main challenge that the ASD is having, in addition to the results, has been the perceived lack of engagement with communities. So, people can't feel like in this work you're doing something to them, particularly when your heart is coming from a place where you're trying to do something for it or to help.
Right.
So there was an article or study that came out recently too that just talked about the issues or the challenges that they've had with engaging communities. So, I want the ASD to do well, because if they're doing well, then that means kids in Shelby County are doing well.
Yeah. Bill?
What are your thoughts on the legislation that's in Nashville right now that would say either freeze the ASD where it is or abolish it outright? I think both versions are circulating out there.
Well, I mean, I think that, I think that we don't have a lot of time to worry about that. I mean, I think that, we're focusing on, the work that's going on in the I-zone. I get the point. I think that, to the extent they have schools that are doing well and they have some good practices, there's nothing wrong with saying, let's figure out, how to make the ASD better. But I guess, if given all the politics around all that, I mean, I don't really have, a position on the legislation.
Right. Taking a look at another kind of school, you've been authorized by the school board to look at the formation of a crosstown high school, and those are discussions with Christian Brothers University, with the developers of the project there. How's that going?
It's going well. I mean, that's something we're very excited about. We spend so much time talking about priority schools and bottom 5 and bottom 10% schools. I don't want people to forget we have some very high-performing schools in the Shelby County schools too. I mean, White Station obviously comes to mind, Whitehaven, Central, Maxine Smith, Germantown. The list goes on and on and on. So, part of our strategic plan, one of our priorities is to increase high-quality school options. So I think Crosstown gives us an opportunity to do just that. The vision is for a 500-student high school right there in the Crosstown, serving Midtown families and families throughout the county. I know that they're want to be very aggressive about bringing some private school families back to the school system. So, we hope to have some proposal for the board to consider, hopefully at our March board meeting. But I think that there's obviously the board is cautious in that, it doesn't want to have a bad financial deal. And then it also wants to make sure that it attends to the needs or concerns from schools like Central, who are worried about losing kids. But I think that we can come up with something that'll be a win-win for everybody, particularly for kids.
And the school board members that you heard from also were particularly concerned about the impact on other schools. Yeah. As well. Does this drain from those schools, or is this a net gain in students?
From my position, I think it should be a net gain. I mean, I think that if you create high-quality schools and attract people who wouldn't normally be in your schools, then that's a win-win. I mean, we talked about restarting and doing something special with East High School. I still want to do that. Mm-hmm. I think the better schools we can create, or the more high performance schools we can create, I think it's better for the district. I think it's better for the community and for families.
Just a couple things, just about 2 minutes left here. The BEP lawsuit that you all are suing the state over the funding formula basic education program. What's the status on the lawsuit? So
the court actually I think about a week ago, everything was on hold because there was the court was considering whether the Hamilton County lawsuit could proceed as a class action, I believe. So they actually just made a ruling on that. So I suspect that it'll pick up pretty soon. But even having said that, we're very appreciative of the governor's commitment to education. I know he had a big inclusion in terms of additional dollars in this budget. So that's certainly a step in the right direction. And there's a voucher bill up in Nashville. What is your take on vouchers? Well, I think that at the end of the day, again, we can't control what the legislature does. I think if we continue to make better schools and have schools that are doing so well that people don't want to go to, private schools, then that's a challenge for us that we need to rise to the level of.
Shifting gears a little bit, a lot of discussion, and we're doing a show on it next week, and it's just in the papers about minority and women-owned businesses and contracting. The study came out that the county budget, it's under 1% or 2% or something. The city's only at 12%. That in a majority African-American city. Do you track that? Does the contracting that the Shelby County Schools does, and are you happy with your performance in terms of minority and women-owned businesses?
No, I think that our numbers are, very low as well. And I applaud our board for being very aggressive. I mean, I think that we probably will be discussing a disparity study probably at our March board meeting. But I think at the end of the day, what I like to see, Eric, is that if, general contractors in this county and city know that this is important to all governmental entities, they're in the best position to fix this. I mean, if they go out and recruit partners who can do the work and form partnerships, then we may be able to do this without all these kinds of studies, but certainly we've got a big room for improvement.
All right. Thank you for being here. Bill, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.
Support for Behind the Headlines is provided in part by the Bartlett Area Chamber of Commerce and its member company, Ewing Kessler Incorporated, providing mechanical and building control solutions for sustainable, energy-efficient building performance. This privately owned regional company is committed to relationships and service responsive to clients' needs. Learn more at ewingkessler.com and ekautomation.com.